Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the next instalment of our Beecraft Live series. I just want to thank you all for joining us once more in our monthly event with the sole aim of trying to give you as much information as we possibly can regarding beekeeping in its many different sort of iterations, and we try to cover as much as we possibly can. And so today we've been very kindly joined by Julian Routh, and I'm just going to show Julian. So here's Julian from the BBKA. And Julian, could you just give a little bit of an overview of your responsibilities within the BBKA and why it's pertinent to today's discussion?
Right, within the BBKA, I'm chairman of the Education and Husbandry Committee, and it's been our initiative to deal with training of all aspects, and we're the ones that have launched the Bee Health Month. We had one last year, and this year again we've got one. And it's really to prompt beekeepers to both look at disease in their own colonies, but for associations to have events which highlight particular diseases. This year's mainly Nosema, and provide information to beekeepers on how they should do it, what they should do if they find anything. And in the case of Nosema, there's been a lot of microscopy days to show people how to diagnose it and to diagnose it for people. So it's beginning to move very well this month at the moment. But I'm also responsible for a much wider range of training and do a lot of training myself.
And you're a seasonal bee inspector?
Seasonal bee inspector as well, yeah, which teaches me a lot about disease. With that, it never fails to amaze me what I see out there, but when you look at 1,000 or so colonies each year as part of that, you see all sorts of things.
No, I should imagine. A very busy man, I would doubt. And for those of you who are familiar with us, you've got the dulcet tones here of Rodri, our Welsh representative. So, hi, Rodri. Thanks again for joining us. And we're also very kindly joined by Sebastian Owen from Vita Europe. So, hi, Seb. Thanks for joining us. Do you want to just give us a little bit of an introduction as to how you sit in and how Vita sits in with bee diseases?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, Vita is the world's only global honeybee health specialist. So we research, develop, and sell innovative products for honeybee health. We're best known for our varroa control products, Aquastan, which has been around for getting on 30 years now, still a world-leading product, and Aquiguard, which is more recent and is a great varroa control product. We also got a range of sort of ancillary products. Well, unfortunately, our technical director, Dr. Max Watkins, who is a beekeeper and is a world-renowned expert on honeybee health, isn't available tonight. I'm neither of those things, but I hope to be a beekeeper soon, as soon as I've got myself on a course, and I also hope that I can add a little bit of interest from a more commercial side of things.
Fantastic, thanks, Seb. And I'm the marketing director here, and we should be joined. Probably there'll be a bulldozer moment with a couple of people joining us at some point. Most likely Andrew, the chairman here, or chief executive from Beecraft, and Wendy, most likely our marketing manager. So we'll see if they get to join us. But just a couple of sort of housekeeping points. So this webinar here is purely to talk about the BBKA Bee Health Month, which is an initiative which I understand started, I think, last year, if I'm correct with that, Julie?
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
And it's coming to this month for this year after sort of a great acclaim from last year, basically making beekeepers and specifically beekeeping associations aware of bee diseases and how they can help us lowly beekeepers in understanding a little bit more. So look, just a little bit of housekeeping before I sort of go on. One thing I just want to mention, this is absolutely a live discussion if you're watching this now on Wednesday, I think the 20th of May. So if you do want to comment, please do. And what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to screen share here how you do that. If you're watching this on the Beecraft website, you will probably be looking at this form here. Now, what you can do is if you click on this click here to ask a question option, you'll see here the ability to put your name and your email and put your question in, and I can then bring that into the conversation and put any questions that you may have towards Seb or Julie in this respect, or even to Rodri and myself, and we'll be happy to try and answer those questions. Equally, what we have done in this as well is everything that we're talking about here, there's a lot of links for the NBU and B-Base, which we're referencing. And what we've actually done is we've preloaded this website with these links. And this little button here, which many of you will see both live and recorded, after the show is finished, if you click on that, be part of the conversation, this little video that you're looking at will go into a big screen with lots of different links down the right-hand side, which you can basically get an awful lot more information about what we've talked here about today. So we hope that's of big use to you. Let me just start out. I think it's been a pretty busy time. Julian, I know you're going around seeing a lot of beekeepers. I think there are an awful lot of swarms around at this moment. Is that what you're finding?
The bees are beginning to swarm, but what's been happening at the moment is that because of the weather, certainly in the Midlands where I work, it's been classical April showers, even though in the middle of May. And although the bees have been preparing to swarm, I've seen a lot of colonies that have got sealed queen cells with the queen still present. And you know very well that given a few minutes of warm sunny weather, that swarm's going to come out. They're already primed for it, and they're just waiting for the weather to get out. So unless you've looked at your bees very recently, anything may have happened. And even if you find sealed queen cells, if the bees are nice and friendly, keep looking for the queen. She may still be there, and you've still got time to stop the swarm. Basically get the queen out as quick as possible and into a nuke box or something like that, or do a full split, in whichever way you normally do it. But keep looking for the queen. There have been both, I've found, sealed queen cells and the queen in quite a lot of colonies.
Yeah, it has been classical sort of April showers into May, hasn't it? But just for those of you who perhaps have sort of like a few little swarm photos, I'm just going to share with you a couple of photos which have been shared with us over Facebook recently. So we've got this one hanging off the end of a bike, which I quite like. Sorry, this one off a car, sorry, which was very, very popular. We had another one which came into us, which was this one, sorry, which came off the end of a bike carry case, which I thought was quite unique. Quite nice to get that one off. And my favourite of the lot, which was shared through our own BeeKids page today, was this one, and I thought was a particularly good one in the sense of they managed to sort of sit on two places, the seat and the cage. So well worth a look at those ones. And sadly, we can't share loads of videos, but also in the social media space, there's been an awful lot of swarming videos which have been shared, and some really clever and unique ways of bees swarming, which are always a joy. So do check out our Facebook page for all of that. But look, this is all about the BBKA Bee Health initiative. So I've given a little bit of an overview, but Julian, would you mind just giving us a more detailed view of what the emphasis is here for the BBKA and what the motivation behind it is for this initiative?
Well, let's start with the motivation. The one thing that we're absolutely certain about in terms of beekeeping is that to get the best out of our colonies, the best out of bees, and to make them last as long as we would wish them to, keeping them free of disease and controlling disease is a very major element to it. And unfortunately, certainly what I find getting around, and we find with a lot of people in early years of beekeeping, is that the recognition of disease causes them real problems. Partially because they don't, in metaphorical terms, open their eyes and fully look inside the colony, because most of the signs, once you know what they are fairly easy to see. Now, the problem that early years beekeepers have got is that unless they're in a very active association or work with other more experienced beekeepers, there's nobody there to show them what the diseases look like and what the characteristics are, even before they start doing anything about treating them. So the real key is that we've been starting with on all this disease work, especially the brood diseases, which isn't Nosema, but the other ones, is to learn what a healthy colony looks like. The brood's fairly easy. We've talked about that many times before. It's in all the books. All the unsealed brood should be C-shaped, segmented, pearly white. The sealed brood should be nice, digestive biscuit coloured, slightly raised, non-perforated. If it's like that, it's fine. But the real message we want to get to beekeepers is to recognise that. And if it's not like that, to ask somebody. Now, this is easy with members of an association because there's probably someone there that knows a bit more about it. If all else fails, the bee inspectorate's there, but we're fairly heavily loaded with work and we can't deal with every individual inquiry. We'd far prefer to leave the normal minor disease inquiries to local associations. When it comes to the bees themselves, the adult bees, you're looking for something other than their normal behavior. And what you'll see in the colonies, which Nosema is a colony disease, you'll see that the colony just isn't building up as well as it should do in the spring. Its old name was spring dwindling disease. It gets the old bees, they don't have as long a life. This is the winter bees that have come through, and they tend to die off before there's enough young bees being bred, and the colony just dies out because there are insufficient young bees to take over the running of the colony, if you like. If it's Nosema apis, you'll get this. It tends to occur fairly early in the season, and very, very often the bees will get dysentery. So you'll see staining on the combs, on the top bars, round the entrance of fecal discharge, making a mess of the hive, and every one of those is absolutely laden with Nosema spores. The bees try and clear it up, get it into their gut, it reinfects them, and it gets passed on from adult bees. Nosema serrana is a little bit different in that you get the dwindling. It doesn't tend to get the fecal staining, the dysentery, but it will collapse the colony typically later in the year. So again, it's looking at, in that case, the colony, how it's behaving. The effect on the bees is to shorten their life as much as they get a bit lethargic. So you won't see an awful lot of that. The other things to look at bees are obviously things like deformed wing virus, very evident, shrunken abdomens, which you also get with the deformed wing virus, and then the other classic signs, which will be chronic bee paralysis. You've got the two signs, which are the black shiny bees with all the hair snapped off, or the ones that are trembling, usually with a K-wing on top of the frames, and very often later on, if it's more advanced, you get a lot of bees outside the front of the hive, dead ones, which can look as bad as poisoning in some cases. You get this raft of dead bees in its later stages. But the real key that we want to get people doing is to open their eyes and look at the bees and look at the colony, look at the combs. And the other thing that we've been getting and trying to persuade all associations is to have a microscopist who can do the analysis, show other people, and persuade the members to bring their sample of adult bees along. And certainly in our association, we had a disease day that was set up with microscopes. We had one person just analysing those samples of bees for Nosema. Some had got it, some were free. Most bees have got some Nosema, but you need a sample of 30 adult bees. And it's a relatively easy test to do if you know how to use a microscope and have got all the equipment. Certainly I can do 20 or 30 a day with no trouble in my spare time. And it's well described in books like Bob Mora's microscopy book and things like this. And we're trying to get it so that every association, either local association or at least county, has got at least one microscopist who is prepared to do that level of analysis. Because once it's confirmed, then the beekeeper can do something about it.
So that's, in essence, I mean, what the BBK are trying to do here is bring awareness to bee health. Because I would assume at this time of year as well, it's particularly pertinent because most beekeepers like us will be out there checking for queen cells, and maybe it becomes a secondary thing to look for disease. And I suppose what you're trying to do is raise awareness to.
Well, what will be seen is that you'll go to colonies, which may have been a few weeks ago. Certainly, they're just not building up in the way that you'd expect them to. I went out to one beekeeper a couple of days ago. Between him phoning me saying something's horribly wrong with my bees, and 3 days later when I got to him, the colony had died out. And that was showing a lot of fecal staining on the combs. They were also starving in his case, so a combination of those two things, just all his bees had died out in a matter of days. So when you first look at your bees in the season, it won't be building up as quickly as you've got. So if you go to your colony now, and if you've got more than one colony, one is particularly behind the others in terms of build-up, that is the time to try and get those bees checked for Nosema, because it will set them back.
And I think that's particularly key, isn't it? Because I think that is, I mean, one of the things, Seb, on the Vita website, for example, there's a very useful description of Nosema on the Vita website. We've actually put the link for those of you who want to look at this afterwards. There's a particularly good link there for Nosema and explained in the different forms of it, because there are two forms which we'll go into detail in a little bit. But one of the things that you mentioned is there's a big thing here about prevention rather than cure, which is Nosema it's better to have a good, healthy forming hive very early on, and then you will be able to ascertain whether or not they are actually indeed a healthy colony or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's accurate to say, Seb.
Absolutely. I think just to agree with Julian, we think these measures at the BBK, the raising awareness, is just fantastic. I think education, which we do try to provide on our website, is vital. It's, from a personal note, I spend a lot of my working life visiting beehives around the world, but I don't want to actually keep my own bees until I've learned how to do it, and I think that's essential. And initiatives like this from the BBKA in raising awareness and getting beekeepers looking at their hives and learning about what they're looking at is fantastic. Actually, we have a similar initiative that we launched earlier this month, I think, which is for open to all associations, and it's asking them to submit what they do that helps their beekeepers keep healthier bees, and what sort of innovative ideas they have. Could be something very simple to just running microscope classes in their apiary, or whatever it might be. We're looking for associations to tell us what they do. There's going to be prizes. We're hoping to award it at Apamunda and Korea in September. But more than that, what we're hoping to do is share this with all associations around the world. What great ideas we receive, and how that can then be used by other associations to do exactly what the BBK are talking about, to raise awareness, to make sure that beekeepers aren't just going and checking for queen cells, that they're actually checking for healthy colonies.
Absolutely, and I must commend Vita and the way that you do that, because I know you do a lot of very collaborative, community-based learning and education, which is always good to see. But let's just talk a little bit about in detail here for perhaps those of us who are not that familiar with Nosema, Julian, because there are an awful lot of more beginner-based beekeepers who watch these hangouts and get a lot of interest, and we are having a few questions coming in now. So thank you for those of you who are sending them in. Please do. That's part of this discussion, is to have this live discussion. But let's just talk about Nosema specifically. I'm going to bring up some pictures to try and help people understand a little bit as well. So bear with me a second, and I'm just going to try and bring them up as well. But while I'm doing that, Julian, can you just give us a little bit of a rundown as to, in specifically, what is Nosema? How
right,
let's start at the Nosema is, what different sorts of Nosema there are, what are the lookout signs, and how can we deal with it if we have it? There's about 3 or 4 questions in one there, but hopefully
right,
I'll talk through it.
Let's start with what Nosema is. It's a parasite of the bee. It's a single-cell fungus. Technical names are Microsporidium. They're very, very common across all sorts of animals. It's a thing, and what you can see on the screen there is, in fact, the spores of Nosema apis, which you'll look at times 400 to see those. They're tiny. They're about the same size as a very small pollen grain. If you're looking under the microscope, they're very easy to confuse with a forget-me-not pollen, which is one of the pollens. They're about 6 micron long.
Clarify, Julian, is it these little small ones here?
They're the ones, the rice-shaped granules there. They're the Nosema spores, yeah. Now, those spores are really quite tough, and they will stick around a hive and on the combs for a long time, like years, if you don't do anything about it. But the way that the infestation starts is that the bees will, there's the size of them, the two, one Nosema apis and Serrana. Nosema apis is the one, as its name would suggest, has been with honeybees for as long as anybody's looked, and probably before they had microscopes. It's the one specialised on honeybees, or on Apis mellifera.
Apis mellifera, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Apis Serrana, or Nosema Serrana, has been recently found in honeybees in Apis mellifera. It's in fact a parasite of Apis Serrana, the Asian honeybee, and nobody's quite sure when it crossed between species. The oldest samples that people can find go back to about 1996. They've done DNA analysis on those, and it's been present in those. So it may have crossed across at some time in the past. and lots of colonies now are infested with one or the other or both. The effect on the bees is similar in many respects, not totally the same. But what this little spore does, it gets into the gut of a bee when they're cleaning the comb, when they're cleaning up these fecal stains. They may well be able to pick it up externally. Nobody's sure where all the places you can pick it up. Certainly it comes in on robbing bees and this sort of thing. And it gets into their gut. Then that spore germinates, and it's got a little coiled spike inside it, which you can't see on either of those two. You need an electron microscope to see it. But in the case of Nosema apis, it'll fire that into the wall of the gut, and then they will start reproducing like mad. And Nosema apis tends to stay in the gut wall, and you will get millions of these forming inside the gut of a bee. When they're mature, they form spores which go into the gut, come out with the feces. That obviously damages the gut, irritates the gut for one thing, but equally cuts down its ability to digest food, which is what shortens the life of a bee and makes them somewhat more morose than they would normally be. Those spores, because they fill the gut and disturb it, they can give the bee dysentery, get any form of congestion. That feces gets discharged inside the hive, which is, as you can see on that top one there, you get this fecal staining on the top, on the face of the comb, and very often around the entrance. I think there's a picture of it around the entrance as well. The bees basically can't control themselves. It's worse when you've got congestion in the hive, which is usually in the beginning of the year when the weather's not so good. The bees have been flying, they've got pollen, they've got some stuff, and it gets cold. They get inside the hive. They can't get out to defecate. It spreads around, and that just spreads it very rapidly. And as I said earlier on, what this does is shorten the life of the bee. If it's in the winter bees, their life is shortened, and that can be shortened to the point where there's insufficient new young bees coming through, and the colony just dwindles away without the new bees to take over. Nosema cerana is a bit different in that it is not a natural parasite of Apis mellifera, and the evidence we've got so far says that when that fires its little spike into the gut wall, it can actually penetrate the gut wall, and Nosema cerana can go into the other tissues of the bee and do rather more damage to the bee. You don't tend to get as much dysentery simply because it's in the other tissues, not just the gut wall. But that can end up, again, with weakening the bees, and that tends to spread a little bit later on in the season, and the colony can suddenly collapse later on in the summer from that. Although the full effects of that aren't really fully understood, because it's only in recent times we've had the DNA analysis to separate the two. The visual inspection under a microscope, unless you see hundreds and hundreds of these, you can't tell the difference between the two. Apis mellifera is slightly fatter, but you have to have a very good eye and lots of experience to do that, and that's really up to National Bee Unit people, something like that. The labs.
Say, I mean, just looking at this slide again, I mean, the difference is on the left. This one here is Apis.
Nosema apis, yeah.
And looking at this, I mean, I think we're talking micrometers.
Yes.
Micrometers, I thought it was 5.55 micrometers versus 5.14 micrometers. I mean, it's negligible even under this.
Yeah, that's right.
Very, very difficult. So,
no, unless you're seeing them day in, day out, and they've got the backup of DNA analysis, only a few specialists can tell them apart visually. It's really down to DNA analysis, which at the moment is outside the scope of hobbyist beekeepers.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about that for a second in terms of sort of how to, if you want to have a look at your own bees. I know we were talking off air about Bob Mora's microscopy book. I think you were talking about taking samples of bees and how we can use it. I think you said there's a very good example in that book, and I'll try and bring a screen share up so people can see that. But perhaps using what Bob has put in the book, can you tell us a little bit about how beekeepers can prove or disprove they have Nosema in their hives?
Right. The first stage is, if you want to do a full diagnostics, is to get a sample of adult bees. And usually, well, what you do want is older bees. Now, if they're foraging very actively, the foragers, by their very nature, are older bees, and the way I normally do it in those hives is take the first frame out of the hive when I'm doing an inspection, shake all the bees off, unless it's got the queen or queen cells on it, but normally the end frame is relatively empty, and put it across the entrance, because then all the flying bees will come back and sit on that frame, and within a few minutes you've got a nice bunch of bees that you know that are older, and as long as you've got all the bees off that frame in the first place, you can guarantee the queen isn't there. You want about 30 bees, which don't sit there and count them one at a time. It's the number that will fit into a standard small matchbox if it's packed full. And the best way of doing that is open the matchbox, take the slider out, put it on top of the bees, on the comb, and then just slide the outer back on it, and you will find that you've got, if it's on a big patch of bees, you'll have 30 bees in there. The way you can check that is get a little transparent bit of plastic or glass if you want, and you can put that egg over the slider, open it up, and you can see how many bees you've got inside, and if it's full you've got at least 30 in there. Those are live bees. You can't do the analysis on live bees. The best bet is to put them in the freezer overnight. With this analysis, freezing them doesn't matter in the slightest. And then you can take those to your microscopist who will deal with the analysis of those. He would prefer to have them dead. It's not really quite so good to have sort of 20 matchboxes there and find some of them have got live bees. And put them in the fridge overnight, put it in for an hour or so. They will look dead, but as soon as they warm up again, they'll come flying around the room with you. What happens then is that with those 30 bees, which will give you a good statistical backup, we'll cut off the abdomens, don't need the thorax, because the abdomen's got the gut. And then we'll squash those with a small amount of water. For 30 bees, you're going to want about 5 ml of water. Lots of ways of doing that. You don't need special equipment. You can do it in an egg cup with a teaspoon, if you're allowed to use egg cups. You can put them into a small Ziploc bag and just crush them in there with the water. But do make sure that the Ziploc is closed, otherwise you'll get a nasty gooey mess everywhere. Or you can get very nice little pestle and mortars if you're doing a lot of them. Then you take a drop of that fluid, put it on the fluid from that, put it on a microscope slide, put a cover slip on, drop it under the microscope, and times 400, you'll see the sort of things that you saw on those slides there. Most bees have got a small number. If you've got a big infestation, you're going to see hundreds on the slide. It'll be very obvious you've got massive of those little rice-shaped granules, which are the spores. Now, taking the other side of it, the analysis in the hive, what you see, the fecal staining is the most obvious one. The decline of the bees in there is what you'd normally see before that. You'll look and say, why are they going down? You'll look, you see the fecal staining. There's two sides to that. Those fecal stains are in themselves full of spores, so that any form of control, you need to get rid of those. They will also be on the combs as well, coming from the bodies and the feet of the bees. So for longer term things, regular comb changing is very important, because that takes away that disease load on regular occasions. The other real obvious factor that you've got is that if you've had it anywhere near your hives or even in an apiary, the one way that we know of killing those spores off, other than burning the combs, which is what you do with the infected ones, is to fumigate with acetic acid in the autumn, or you can do it at any time during the year, not with bees in. For each box, whether it's a super or brood box, put in about 50 ml of 80% acetic acid. That's very, very strong vinegar. It'll smell, you'll smell it all over the place. Make sure that you're not on a concrete slab. Use a normal crown board underneath, and cover any metalwork with petroleum jelly. And that's one of the few ways that can guarantee of killing the spores off in a body, in both on the frames and on the hive body. Although my preference is not to reuse frames from a disease colony, I burn the lot. It's the only 100% way of being sure of anything. But when you're fumigating, you want to leave it for about 7 days. I find that wrapping them in a wheelie bin liner is big enough to take about 4 boxes or 4 super boxes, 2 to 3 brood boxes, because it gives complete sealing of that. You can tape up the joints between the boxes, but simply putting them in a polythene bag is rather easier and quicker to do. But that you'll do anytime you've seen Nosema, but it's a standard practice on all supers in the autumn, realistically, if you want to promote good hygiene.
Okay, so let me just go back. I'm going to go back 2 steps here for a second. Because
yep.
We talked, just for people who perhaps don't know maybe Bob Mora and they don't know of his book, what I've just done here, for those of you who want to perhaps trial this yourself and do what Julian has just mentioned there, because there's some unbelievably useful tips in there. What I'm just going to do is I'm just going to screen share this, and again, what I'm screen sharing here, this is Bob's book, £17.50, Practical Microscopy, and it's got everything that Julian has mentioned in there, so hopefully that will help you out. The URL for that is at the top, but don't worry about that for now, because after this show, if you use the button which I mentioned earlier on, which just as a reminder, there you are, if you click on this little button after the show, which is be part of the conversation, all of the links and advice that we're talking to, whether it be the Vita's page for Nosema, or whether it be any of these NBU articles that we're talking about, or Bob's book, for example, it's all available by clicking that book. You won't come into us, so don't worry, you're not going to join us, even though it says be part of the conversation, which is slightly disarming for those of you who sort of don't want to join us in this talk. You won't. It'll just open up all of those links for you to access all of those details. So that's the first thing on the...
Can I bring up one other thing that cross-references to the... Anybody who's got older bee books, older than a couple of years ago, might see reference to a compound called Fumidil B, which used to be used for the treatment of Nosema. It works quite well against Nosema apis. It has been banned for at least 2 years, it may be 3 years. It's been banned for use, partially because it was found to be potentially carcinogenic. And you feed it in the syrup so that there was potential for getting it into the honey if used wrongly. But more disturbingly, some research that was done in the States indicated that Nosema cerana was rather more resistant to Fumidil in the doses that were normally used. And the consequence was it actually promoted Nosema cerana over Nosema apis. And over a season's test, they found it actually made things worse in the colony. So in terms of benefit to beekeepers, it's probably better that Fumidil B has been removed. Now we've got a lot of Nosema cerana than ever it was in the past. It was used a lot prophylactically, which was never a good thing because it's a really good way of generating resistance in organisms anyway.
And just a point, I was just looking at my reference box, I had looked at it earlier on. For those of you who will watch this from America, obviously Fumidil B is not the same name. It's
Fumigillin.
Fumigillin, I can never pronounce that correctly, so just as a clarification point. Okay, that's wonderful. Seb, have you got anything else to add on that from your side on any research that Vita have done, or is that there?
Something fascinating that for me that I found out was Julian was referencing the older bees will be foraging, and what I didn't realise, I think it's fairly recent research, is that actually Nosema acts as a sort of aging agent on bees, so that it encourages the bees workers to move up earlier from being nurse bees and looking after the queen to going into foraging and guard bee roles much earlier than they should do. And so you end up with an aging demographic in the bee colony, and that is one of the causes of the sort of dwindling, that there's not enough of foraging going on because the bees are aging early. And whenever I think of Nosema, I think of the way that it was introduced to me by my father, who was telling me that it leads to dysentery in bees, and it often is a problem during the winter. During the winter, the bees are clustering and they're fanning to maintain a temperature, and it can mean that they can't hold on until the cleaning flight in spring. And I don't know what our audience is like, how international it is, how well this expression will translate. But you've heard the proverbial always start with me.
And you just cracked out right at a really interesting point. Say that again, because I was on tenterhooks waiting for your saying. What were you
It just he then so you have the proverbial literally hitting the fan.
Hitting the fan. There we go. It was all gearing up for a wonderful thing, and it just cut out. I couldn't believe it.
That's my comedy timing.
But you mentioned their dysentery, and I think it's quite an important point, because one of the things that I was very, very concerned about, and I remember in my second season, I definitely did have Nosema, but one of the best bits of advice I was told by my bee inspector at the time was that dysentery is a byproduct, if you want to put it that way, of having Nosema. But just because your hive has dysentery, it doesn't mean that they've got Nosema. Is that the right way around, Julian?
That's correct, yeah. It can be a symptom of Nosema, but dysentery occurs for other things. You can get it with amoeba as well. You can get it just because they've been, for instance, eating fermented honey, or they've got other stuff in their guts. If, for instance, you feed bees because you think they're healthy and they like brown sugar rather than white sugar, that will give them dysentery because of the fibres in the brown sugar. So yes, they can get dysentery for a lot of other reasons, but Nosema, it's worth a check if you've ever seen dysentery, doing a check for Nosema. If it's not there, then find out what the other reason is. It's something you've done wrong, probably.
Yeah, I was guilty of that. If anyone's read my rather comedy version of my first year of beekeeping, the brown sugar thing was a classic for me, and I really screwed that right up. I put it on, I then realised my mistake, tried a different form, which was the light brown sugar. I then realised that was wrong too. I mean, you know, there are a lot of beekeepers out there who will muck it up, like I did, so don't worry. There's a big bad beekeepers club, and you will always learn very, very quickly, as I did.
I think one of the very important things is for people to share their mistakes as well as their successes, because for every one person who's prepared to speak out of it, there's quite a lot sitting around the back saying, oops, shouldn't have done that, hopefully learning from it, but some of them don't seem to learn.
No, I learned, well actually I didn't learn the hard way, but I certainly, if anyone screwed up, I screwed up monumentally. My worst screw up was actually getting so passionate in my first year, was taking out a torch at dusk and checking the entrance to see if they were all okay, and obviously realising that you stick a torch in there, they're all going to come out again.
Yep.
So that wasn't very clever. Got some very bad stings on my stomach that day. But anyway, if anyone wants to know about how to screw it up, that was me. Okay, so let's move on, because we've done a lot on Nosema, and one of the things I think is quite an interesting point, which is not discussed a lot, I don't think, is there's chronic bee paralysis. CBV, chronic bee paralysis virus.
Yes.
Anyway, CBV.
Yeah.
That's it. Tell us a little bit about that, Julian, because obviously it's not talked about an awful lot, but obviously it's had quite a big history.
It's got a very major history. Yeah. It was probably the cause of, or a major factor in what some people will refer to as Isle of Wight disease, which most books will say killed 95% of the traditional UK bee, the black bee, on however you look at it, in just after during and just after the First World War. Massive losses of bees at that stage. Acarin was discovered in 1920, or the mite was first taken out of the trachea in 1920, and it was blamed on acarin. Now that's another mite known in the States as tracheal mite. It's almost never found in this country now because Varroa treatments kill that off as well as they do with Varroa. So if you find acarin in a colony, you really ask the beekeeper about their Varroa treatment. But it was blamed on that because they found that, and in the 1920s they didn't know about viruses anyway. But the symptoms of a lot of the symptoms of chronic bee paralysis are very similar to those described of Isle of Wight disease. And unfortunately, we've got some no samples from that time to run through DNA analysis to find it. But it does seem to be increasing in some years. A few years ago, 2012, we had that very rainy summer. There was a lot of it around because, as I mentioned earlier, congestion in the hive is a major factor, because the one symptom, the black shiny bees, is because the hairs get brittle, they snap off, and they contain virus particles which then contaminate other bees which pick it up. There may be a factor that it's connected with Varroa. Certainly in the early days, it was suspected that Varroa had a significant influence on the frequency of infection, and that again will be to do with the reduction of immune response due to Varroa having sucking the hemolymph out the bees. But certainly the virus was known well before that. You'll find it in Brenda Ball's stuff going back into the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. They'd identified it, but at that time it very, very rarely occurred as a set of symptoms and a disease in the colonies. It certainly has become more common, and it's worth inspecting. Once you get your eye in for the black shiny bees in particular, you can see those. They act normally, but they've got much shortened lives and will spread it elsewhere. At the moment, there's not a lot we know that we can do about it, although, as I again said earlier, I've had colonies where it's been reasonably bad, changed the queens to a queen from a different strain, and it seems to have solved it. So there's quite possibly a genetic susceptibility to it, but I think it's too early specifically to say that.
Well, tell you what, let's just bring in, and incidentally, I forgot to say thank you to Ian for mentioning about my sound. So I do appreciate that, Ian. I've changed the settings, so hopefully the volume's a little bit louder now for me talking. But with respect to this, one of the difficulties is I can't ever show you any YouTube clips on here, and I'm afraid to say with chronic bee paralysis, it's actually very difficult to show it in a photo. So I'm hoping this isn't going to work, and I'm hoping I'm not going to get blacklisted by Google here for showing you a video live on a Hangout. But maybe you can just tell us here a little bit, Julian, of what we're meant to be looking at here.
There's one bee there that is now on the right of the image. If you can possibly go back a little bit, okay, can you take that image back a bit?
Yeah.
There, if top right corner, right-hand corner, just walking towards the edge, there is a black shiny bee. Oh. Gone off again.
Let me get him back.
There it is. Yeah, just on the top of the frame.
Which one?
That's it there in the middle, just going up towards the top of the frame.
There, yeah, got you.
And they're very clearly, because nearly all the hairs have come off if it's well developed. They just appear dark colour and shiny. There again, top right of that, top right-hand corner there.
Is it this one here? With my mouse, or is it over this way? I'm
over that way, over the when it cycles round again.
I just realised I haven't actually got it for everybody so that they could see it. So
yeah, if you could stop it, if you can pause it there.
Yeah.
Top right-hand corner, as you're looking towards it. There, you're just over it there. Down a bit, left a bit.
That one here.
That one there.
Okay, so let me see that here again, and I can we can show it. Oh, him, her, sorry.
Her, yeah. If you see, it's noticeably shiny. It's lost its stripes, which are caused by the hairs. It's once you've got your eye in, they're quite easy to spot. But it's knowing to look, and that's one of the symptoms. I think that's symptom B or symptom 2. And you can see those, and there can be. If there's 1 or 2 in the hive, it really doesn't matter. As long as there's plenty of space in the hive, you don't get the congestion, and in all probability, it'll clear itself out. If, on the other hand, you make up a very congested, you don't put supers and things on, there's one there you see. You can see how it's effectively how the stripes have gone from its abdomen. And that's because all the hairs have come off. And a bit later on, it'll lose the hairs on its thorax as well. And you can see in that one the sort of K-wing that you get. There's another one you can see. See how the abdomen is clearly shiny. And they once you've got your eye in, they stand out quite well. So the other symptom you get is these bees that, well, you can't see it on a still photo, but they're trembling. They've got the K-wing you've got there, and they just tend to sit on the top of the frame. But that really depends on how you look at your bees, because you'll only see bees sitting there on top of the frames if you're very gentle with your bees, haven't used too much smoke. I always work on the principle, I like to work on bees with the intention that they don't even know that you're going through them. You don't alter their characteristics at all. If you're at all rough, if you use too much smoke, you'll lose all the natural characteristics of the colony. But those are things worth looking at. At low levels, it really isn't too much of a problem. But if there's a lot of congestion, you've got bad rainy weather, this sort of thing keeps the bees in, you get a lot of it, and then it does kill the bees, and you get quite a lot of bees out the front of the hive all dead. And I've been called out several times for suspected poisoning, where in fact it's been chronic bee paralysis.
Well, actually, one of the questions which came in from Kahili, who says, one of my hives a few years back had a bad case of chronic paralysis. It was situated under a tree in quite a damp area.
Yeah.
It was moved to a dry, sunny area and recovered well. Is damp and cold a cause? Is what she,
Damp and cold isn't, but that hive in the damp cold thing will be a lot longer to warm. Take a lot longer to warm up during the day than the one in the nice sunny area. And because they're damp, they'll lose temperature. They'll stay crusted for very much longer in those conditions, which gives you the congestion, which spreads the virus rather more. So move it in the dry, sunny area, it'll warm up earlier, they'll get out flying earlier in the, not just of the day, but earlier in the year. They'll be out flying. They can take their cleansing flights for Nosema, but also they're just not packed in on top of each other, which limits the spread of the virus.
With most bee diseases, particularly with Nosema and the chronic bee paralysis virus, any sort of stress is going to make it worse, and a damp, cold apiary increases the stress, and so I can completely understand why moving it to a warmer site would have helped.
Mm. So is there any other treatment for beekeepers to think about in that, or is it simply a warmer site, free the congestion up, and it's more prevention than it is cure, right? I mean,
it's again prevention, and because it's spread by virus particles, nobody's quite sure how long those virus particles sit around, but it's a fair bet that they contaminate the comb. So again, regular comb changing, bringing new foundation, you remove any chance of that disease load which is building up on the comb. If you change your combs every 2 to 3 years, with new foundation, you're going to remove Nosema spores, you're going to remove possibly the virus particles, you'll certainly remove the virus particles for sac brood, you'll remove the fungal spores for chalk brood, you may remove Melissococcus EFB spores on a non-clinical site. Changing those combs on a very regular basis, you will end up with a healthier colony.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we've only got a few more minutes left anyway. Let's finish off with this, because it seems as if in most of these cases, and generally, I think in the most cases, I think most beekeepers would rather use less than more cures and chemical interventions. I think there's probably a feeling of less is more. But when it comes to general, I mean, what we've discussed here, in particular with Nosema and chronic bee paralysis virus, is that prevention is the best sort of methodology to not have this in our hives.
Yep.
And we've always mentioned the word good husbandry. And
Yep.
what I think I just want to put out, and Seb, I don't know if you can come in here, and Rodri definitely, because I know you're very good at this side of things as well. If we could have 5 tips that we could give beekeepers to go away and say, these are our top 5 tips on giving good husbandry around our apiary and within our hives, what would you say? Let's start with you, Julian. What would you say is your top tip for good husbandry?
Well, some basic ones to apply to all livestock. Make sure they're well housed, waterproof, clean, warm housing. Make sure that they're well fed, which bees can do themselves most of the year, but not always, and disease-free. And that applies to just about any livestock you're ever going to look after. Those 3 factors, you can apply them to your bees. The good housing really comes down to keeping it clean. You know, if you've had horses in a stable, if you've got pigs in a sty, you clean it out very regularly. Why is it that we leave our bees on the same combs year after year and don't think of changing them? If you change them every couple of years, they're so much healthier.
Lovely. And Rodri, what sort of techniques do you do to keep and maintain good husbandry for your time?
I think a good one I mentioned before is I tend to keep a bucket of washing soda available to wash my hive tool and my gloves between colonies, and I sort of add to that the apiary layout as well. If you've got a layout which limits drifting and robbing potential, then you're going to get less spread of disease between the colonies then. So.
Yeah, I have to say I was brought up on preventing transfer across everything, so always cleaning in between hives, especially on hive tools to sort of scrub it down within the buckets and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. And Seb, have you got anything from the Vita side in terms of good husbandry? Or I mean, obviously I know you're not necessarily a beekeeper right at this moment, but is there anything from your side that you can recommend?
Yeah, I think just to echo what the others have said, that good hygiene, particularly cleaning all the equipment before you move from one apiary site to another, to try to prevent the spread of disease. Removing the stress factors that you can, making sure that there's enough space for the bees, that they're well fed, that they've got enough nutrients. And really, I think the key thing is vigilance, and tying it right back to the BUKA Healthy Bee Month, is that you've got to be aware and know your bees, and look out for early warning signs, because if you can catch it early with anything, it's going to be much easier to deal with.
Absolutely, and you picked up on one thing there which I think is very, very pertinent, and Julian, I always want to sort of finish on this really, because you mentioned it earlier, and it's something I believe in as well, is that we talk about stressing the bees, and Julian, you mentioned about smoking.
Yep.
And smoking the bees, it sort of prevents you seeing the bees in their natural environment, because obviously they're thinking about other things. What do you use as perhaps as an alternative to smoking?
I use very, very little smoke. I find that as long as you're handling bees gently and carefully, one quick whiff of smoke in the entrance is enough for the vast majority of bees. Smokers should always be there in case they get out of control, but generally one whiff of smoke in the entrance, a couple of seconds, let it go through the hive, that's all you need. So I use very, very little smoke at all. And I've never found a need to use anything else.
I was once recommended a very, very fine mist of sugar solution. Very, very, very weak sugar solution.
You'll get very sticky if you do that. It will work under certain... If you're uniting colonies, you can do that. If you're dealing with a swarm, if you're trying to take samples, bigger samples, for say, a Beltsville test for Varroa or something like that, then you can do that, because you put them shake them into a box, put them like that. And if you're on a more commercial basis making packages, yeah, you can unite bees like that very easily. You just give them a spray of sugar syrup. Fine water spray will work, but I've never found it necessary, to be honest. And one other hint and tip, if I can put it as possibly a final gesture, bee suits can be washed. Mine, with my SBI's hat on, get washed every day, so my bee suits have probably been washed many hundreds of times. I might get through 3 bee suits a day, and they're still perfectly good and nice and clean. I see some horrendous bee suits out there, and people wonder why they spread disease and things, and it's their bee suits.
And from my knowledge, it's obviously not using detergents with a hint of smell. And if I'm correct, what's the best way to use it within the washing machine? It's just with, well, in fact, let me put the question to you. Do you use it with anything at all, or do you put in a cupful? And I always mix up the name of this, the granular salt, which is called soda crystals. Is that the right word?
Washing soda.
Washing soda.
I only put that if there's any significant propolis staining on them. I find that normal washing, well, we now use the little capsule things. Normal washing powder works perfectly well. They're not scented very much, and they get well rinsed. But if you've got a bee suit, do all the zips up so there's nothing flapping around loose. But mine goes in every night. And it hasn't suffered over the years. And one of them's 7 years old now. And as I say, I'm working far more than most beekeepers every day.
3 bee suits a day, that's impressive.
Oh yeah, I have to give up if I get through all of those.
All right, well look, I think we probably finished there. We're coming up to the hour mark, and so really, I just want to finish off by just thanking you guys on the panel for joining us. It's been a great sort of discussion, and I've learned an awful lot. And to sort of mention what Seb said there about, this is us supporting the BBKA Bee Health Month, and really it's there to sort of say, primarily let's look at disease first, and having good husbandry, which will help us all as beekeepers protect our bees and hopefully make us better beekeepers moving forward. So I've put all these information, and one last time, do use those buttons to be part of the conversation, which you'll find, I think it's down on this side here, do click on that, and there's lots more information about Nosema, chronic bee paralysis virus. There's lots of information there from Vita. Is it Vita-Europe or is it just VitaEurope.com? So
Vita-Europe.
Vita-Europe.com in there, so all the products that they've got and the help that they are offering, because there's an awful lot on their site as well. And also the link for Bob's microscopy book, if you should so please. So one final thing, obviously we're Beecraft Magazine, looking to be the informed voice of British beekeeping to try and help you in your journey to become better beekeepers, and that's really our primary aim, is to put these on to give you as much information as we possibly can to help all of us and hope that we all learn. So just want to thank you guys, and so thanks to Julian, really appreciate all of your help. That's very kind of you. Rodri, you're always there as a support on these things, so thank you so much. And Seb, really appreciate you from Vita. It's a shame your technical director couldn't be here, but sadly we have to put these up in so much in advance to try and get these organised. So maybe next time we'll get him on as well. That'd be great.
Okay, thanks for having me. I've learned a huge amount.
Lovely. Thanks everybody. We're going to stop the broadcast and hopefully see you all soon. Thank you.